All right, so this week's about managing the firewall configurations, particularly dealing with configuration management and being able to go and view the log files. There we go, froze for a second. All right, so things in this section is basically the purpose in running candidate configuration files, or the difference between running files and candidate files. Configuration files in viewing and being able to filter the firewall logs. For example, focus on system and configuration logs as they're updated all the time when you're managing the firewall. All right, so we did this a little bit last week when we were in the labs, running through the configuration. The running configuration is what's currently active on the firewall. When we go to commit something, we have a candidate configuration that we've changed or done stuff on the firewall, but does not take place actively. This may be different than if you're used to using, say, for example, Cisco equipment that is live. So when you type a command, the command goes live. Juniper is another one that allows you to go through and you make a bunch of changes and then you commit those changes. It also allows you to roll back if there's any issues with your candidate configuration. So we've seen it in the operations. This is how we loaded labs. You have several different ways of saving the configurations, loading those, exporting, importing, and being able to even revert back to the last known running ones. These are all in the global scope and not on a per admin level. So you can revert, save, and load to change configurations locally. You can also do the candidate configurations that you're looking at here. So for example, I make a bunch of changes. I can save that candidate configuration without actually committing it to the device. That would allow me to come in later, load that configuration, then I could save that out. It's also nice if you need snapshots. So in the labs, we use snapshots as a way of starting at the beginning of a lab, so you don't have to configure everything that you did in the prior lab. In a real world, you would use this as a snapshot before you make a bunch of changes. So say you need to integrate and add a new zone, you would have a snapshot configuration that you could roll back to. It may make sense for you to roll back to certain ones at certain points in time. All right, import, export. So as we're working on that device, remember the control planes and the data planes. So with the control planes, we're coming in on the management port. You can have one or two admins working on that. They're going to work on what's the candidate configuration going through. It's the same configuration depending on what's coming in there. You can commit those changes. That goes down to the control plane and gets stored as an XML file. It also gets shoved off to an auto commit that's out to the running configuration, which runs in the data plane. Notice that when we boot and preload back from the XML file to dump it into the running configuration. When we are on the candidate configuration, we can also load a saved one or load a named one from a XML file back to a candidate. Then we have to go and commit it. So when we load a configuration file like you guys do in the labs, we load it to the candidate side. It does not become an automatic running configuration right away. And then, of course, based on those XML files, we can import and export those as necessary. Okay, so the main thing they're going to show here is you have a way of saving configuration files, which is that new little icon there next to the magnifying glass. You can save that, overwrite an existing snapshot XML, and then even be able to revert back from that saved snapshot. When you commit, you can create a time-stamped snapshot with a date, and then you can revert that back changes if you need to. You can also load a specific version back down below. So just telling you all the same ways. You can also save a named configuration snapshot where you can name it whatever you would like versus having a time-stamped snapshot. All right, when we click on the commit, when we did that there, you have an option to commit all the changes, or you can commit the changes done by a specific admin that's logged in. You can see that if they're in the upper left. In order to view all those, you have to have the proper permissions. So you may have one or more admins that work on the firewall. And in the commit scope, you can see what you're going to adjust. So for example, you have policy and objects and device and network in here. Those could be done by one or more admins. We don't know exactly who it is unless we go in and look at the change summary. So if you want to see it on a per admin commit and you click on that option up at the top, you can now see specifically whether you want to see admin or admin Bob's changes, and you could commit just those changes inside of there. From the commit status, you can take a look at the commit window, which is going to give you some warnings that do not prevent a successful commit, and errors that will be there in order to, that do end up preventing a successful commit. If you are on the run shadow or rule shadow, this is going to display shadowed policy rules. We'll talk about that a little bit more as we're working through it. It just means that something is going to overshadow what's going through in that policy. So if you make a small change down here, it's meaning that some other policy above that is going to overshadow that. It's not going to make a change, basically, or it's not going to have the effect that you think it's going to. With that save icon, you can either save changes or you can revert back those changes. You can save changes without necessarily committing, and you can revert back any previous saved ones. If you click on the preview changes, this will allow you to see the exact command lines that you're changing on the underlying XML file. You can preview those. You can see in the green are going to be added, things that are in yellow are modified, and red deleted. Pretty standard XML comparison, but you can do a side-by-side, line-by-line configuration change. This is also handy because there is more than one admin. You can set up transition locks and lock out multiple admins. So if I hit the commit lock, this will block other administrators from committing the candidate configuration. And same way with the config lock, I can block other administrators from changing the candidate configuration as well. So if you're doing massive changes and you don't have two admins that are necessarily communicating, you can block one out so that they aren't making changes at the same time that would break your changes. To view the firewall logs, and we'll use these quite a bit. At this point, we're going to talk primarily about the system logs, but we'll click on the monitor tab at the top, and then on the left-hand side, you're going to click on system. You're going to see everything that happens out of these system log changes. We will also go to the monitor logs and system, but you also have monitor logs and configuration. You can run queries at the top if you want to filter something out. You need to click the X to clear the filter. It's a common across the entire Palo Alto interface, the same style. You can click on any one link in the log, and it's going to add that item as a log filter option. So if I click on, say, admin under this administrator section over here, it's going to create a filter that's going to log everything in here and only bring me back the people that did that as admin. Or if it was admin-Bob, I could filter out admin Bobs. I could result and click on things like succeeded and only get the successful ones or the ones that had issues. When we filter those logs, you can actually build a log filter. Again, you're going to see this throughout the semester as we go in, particularly for traffic logs, where you can build these parentheses and it has its own syntax. So we'll work a little bit closer with this later on when we start building out traffic. But in this case, we're going to filter out traffic that has a source ID or a source IP address of 192.168.1.25 and a destination of 50.53. You can build this out with these individual logs, but you can also chain multiple of these together. At the end, you can go ahead and download the entire log in a CSV format if you want to go and edit it with something else. A lot of times these logs are going to be sent off to some form of a syslog server. You may even go one step further and have a SIEM environment where this is getting sent off to, say, a Splunk server. All right. So again, very basic module this week, going through just having to deal with those configuration files that we've already worked with. In upcoming weeks, we're going to go into much more detail. They've changed the way this is working in the new 10.0 stuff.